Andrew Jackson married Rachel Donaldson Robards, and she was a married woman. And they went to Mississippi and got married, but it wasn't a legal marriage because that was a Spanish-owned territory and only a Catholic priest could do a legal marriage. So even despite that, they claimed that the first husband had divorced her, right? They got married, and they bought this plantation with 15 slaves. Isn't that where it kind of ended? Okay, well, in 1793, Rachel's first husband claimed publicly that he did not divorce her and accused her of adultery. So in 1793, Rachel's first husband claims publicly that he did not divorce her and accuses her of adultery. Anybody know what adultery is? It's an old-fashioned word. What's it mean? You're cheating on your spouse, yeah. That you're an adulteress. Means that you are a married woman cheating on your spouse. Well, that was a bad claim in those days. I mean, you didn't want to be called an adulteress or be accused of adultery. That was bad. The only good thing about it is that in those days, if your spouse came out and accused you of adultery, that made the divorce final, legally. So the good thing for Rachel is she is divorced finally. The bad thing is she's going to be referred to as an adulteress the rest of her life because her first husband accused her of that. That's not good. That's a kind name for you know what, right? Okay, well anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, as a result of that, what do Andrew and Rachel do? Anybody know? After the husband calls her an adulteress and she's now officially divorced, what do? They legally get married. Very good. They remarry, this time legally in Tennessee. But she's going to have that reputation down the line, kiddos, of being an adulteress. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Well, Jackson really didn't like the plantation life. That doesn't mean he sold his plantation. He simply had others run it. And he decided to go into politics. Okay? So he did the plantation thing for a little bit, but didn't particularly like it. So he had other people run his plantation for him, namely slaves. Namely slaves. And he went into politics. Now, Tennessee had become a brand new state. And when you become a new state, what do you get to have in Congress? Come on. Representatives. And you have people in the House and people in the Senate. Well, he is actually appointed to be the first member of the House of Representatives representing Tennessee. So he's appointed to the House and becomes a member of the House of Representatives. And he serves in that capacity for 1 year. He was only 29 years old when he got appointed to the House. And he serves in the House for 1 year. And then he serves in the Senate for 1 year. And then he goes back to the plantation. So, he really doesn't like the plantation work that much. He has other people do the work for him. He enters politics in 1796 at the age of 29. He's appointed the first United States representative from the state of Tennessee. He serves in that capacity for 1 year. Then Carteret goes into the Senate, and then he goes back home to Nashville. Why? Kind of. You're pretty close. The reason why he went back is, according to historians, he didn't have a legislative personality. The reason he went back and got out of politics is he did not have a legislative personality. What might that mean, Zoe, if you don't have a legislative personality? That's really the good answer. The more common answer is he didn't get along well with others. He didn't play well with others. If you compare it to little kids that get together, he couldn't get together with these politicians and play well with others. Okay. Now here's where he got himself in trouble with his colleagues. Congress wanted to pass a resolution of thanks, or a thank you, to George Washington. Why would they want to pass, Bailey, a resolution of thanks to George Washington. What does that mean? If we wanted Congress wanted to pass a resolution of thank you to George Washington. What does that kind of mean in your mind? Right, and Congress wanted to officially and make a big deal and give him kind of a big congressional, governmental thank you for everything you've done. And each member of Congress in the House and the Senate voted on whether they wanted to make this resolution of thanks for Washington. Guess what, Caleb? Guess what Andrew Jackson did?
He voted against it.
He voted against it. He voted against thanking the guy that might be the most famous and honored American of all times. Luke Lamb, why would he do that? Why was he, obviously he was upset at Washington, right, that he wouldn't pass a resolution of thank you. He wouldn't vote for that. What was he mad at him about? I'll be really impressed if you get this. What did Washington do that made Jackson mad? Considering Jackson's background, especially early in his life, when he was like a teenager. What?
Did that have something to do with the British?
It did. Very good. What did Washington do that was pro-British when he was president? Come on, guys. I'll really be impressed. What?
Made a treaty
With what was called what? No, you're close. No, you're closer. What was the name of that treaty made with the British? Because he didn't want to go to war with Britain because he thought we couldn't win.
Oh.
And he sent a representative over there and gave away the store.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Come on. First Supreme Court Justice?
John Jay.
Jay's Treaty. He was so mad at Washington over Jay's Treaty, which he felt he gave everything to the British. Remember, he signed that treaty giving things to the British in exchange for a no-war pledge? Jackson thought that was ridiculous. He hated the British. Why did he hate the British? Because one of them sabered him when he was a young kid. And he just despised Washington for signing Jay's Treaty, and so he said, I'm not voting for that guy to get any resolution of thanks. That was almost like, you know, being treasonous towards the country. If you wouldn't vote for something for George Washington, it's like committing treason. And so he basically said, I can't take this politics at all. So he went back to the plantation. Now, do you remember when they created the federal court system in America? They had all these different courts, right? Including 3 circuit courts, right? What happened in 1798, Jackson left the plantation again and became one of those circuit judges in Tennessee. He became a circuit judge in Tennessee. And they increased, right, from 3 to many over, from the time that Alexander Hamilton did this to this point in history. He became a circuit judge in Tennessee. And he became very, very popular. People liked him a bunch because he maybe would do things that other people wouldn't. He had some guts. You know what? He established the law. He made sure people were law-abiding citizens. And probably the best example of this is there was a young man in Tennessee that would not be arrested by the sheriff. The sheriff tried to arrest him all kinds of times, and he wouldn't be arrested. He would, use force or guns or whatever, and threat of that not to be arrested. And Jackson had heard about this guy that continued to not be arrested. He kept kind of, I guess for a better term, bullying the sheriff and wouldn't let the sheriff arrest him. Well, Jackson saw him one day, and he walked out and he took his loaded pistol and he pointed it right at him and said, basically, guess what? You'll be arrested. Is that his job? He's the circuit judge. He's not the police officer. But he takes out his pistol, and he points at this guy and tells him that he's under arrest. And the guy dropped both pistols. And he was later quoted as saying, I looked at Jackson and there was shoot in his eyes. Which tells you what? The guy was going to shoot him. If you don't get arrested here by me or the sheriff, I'm going to shoot you. And the guy couldn't bluff him. He could maybe bluff the sheriff. But when people ask him, why in the world did you all of a sudden succumb to arrest after you avoided it for so long? He said, I looked at Jackson and he had shoot in his eyes. In other words, he'd have shot him. So he dropped his pistols and became arrested. Jackson became popular enough during the time that he was a circuit judge that they elected him Major General of the militia. And you know him best for doing what as Major General of the militia? Battle of New Orleans. Battle of New Orleans, remember? But we're not there yet. But he becomes the Major General of Tennessee's militia. Well, he serves as circuit judge and he serves as Major General of the militia, but he resigns his circuit judge job in 1804 and moves back to his plantation again. So he's trying to figure out really what he wants to do, isn't he? Okay? But he's very popular with the people of Tennessee. Well, he takes a little more serious approach to his plantation. He begins to see the overall operations. He's got pretty profitable whiskey distilleries on his plantation, and he basically goes back to the plantation and becomes a plantation owner. Starts to run it, oversees its operations, makes sure the whiskey distilleries that he has on his plantation are making good money, and he makes an effort. But then he got into a new passion. Remember what he used to do how did he make money when he was a hellion? Gambled on horse races. Okay? So he decided to breed and raise race horses. That was his new passion as he, continued his work as a plantation owner. He really got into the raising and breeding of race horses, which would lead to what, kiddos? Racing the horses competitively, probably for money, right? That's what you do, right? Well, in 1806, he lets his temper get the best of him again. His emotions run high. Because he and a fellow by the name of Charles Dickinson got into a controversy. They got into a controversy. So Andrew Jackson and Charles Dickens get into a controversy. What do you think Dickens is also? Races horses. So they got in a dispute over a horse race, and Dickinson insulted Jackson. So, in 1806, Andrew Jackson's emotions challenge again. An attorney by the name of Charles Dickinson, who was also a horse racer, got into a discussion or dispute or argument with Andrew Jackson over a horse race and insulted him. And on top of that, you know what he did, Kaylin? This Charles Dickinson looked at Andrew Jackson and said that your wife is nothing but an adulteress. So he not only insults Andrew Jackson, he insults his wife. So Daniel, never sue for slander, always, how they fight him? Through a duel. So he challenges Charles Dickinson to a duel. Not very bright. You know why it wasn't very bright, Danny? Because Charles Dickinson was well known as the best shot in the entire state of Tennessee. Best shot in the state of Tennessee. So he loses his temper a little bit. Can't blame him, can he? He called his wife an adulteress. And he challenges him to this duel, and then he's in a little bit of trouble because Charles Dickinson is considered the best shot in the state. Now, Daniel, you've been through it. You're an experienced dueler. What's Jackson have to do to win this?
Cheat.
What?
Cheat.
Well, he can't cheat. Is there? What? He's got to come up with what to give him an
Some sort
advantage?
of a plan.
Or strategy. He's got to figure out. Now, listen. God dang. And you and I did the same thing. What am I going to do? Am I going to shoot first as fast as I can and hope to hit the guy and kill him? Because if I don't, I got to stand there, and the best shot in the state's going to have an open shot at me. Or do I let him shoot first, and hopefully either misses me or doesn't kill me, and he'll have to stand there? What would you choose? I mean, you think about you're going against the best shot. Well, Jackson chooses the latter, and he chooses to allow Dickinson to shoot first and take his chances. He's not going to work anything out with Dickinson and shoot into the air. Why? Why is he not going to do that? Yeah, he's really mad at him because he called his wife an adulteress. That's like the worst thing you can do, to insult a guy. Okay, so he's going to duel him. There's no question. So he chooses to allow him to shoot first. Well, here's how it goes. They get back to back, they take their paces, Dickinson turns, fires first, hits Jackson in the chest, and the ball lodges in his ribs and sticks there 1/2 inch from his heart. True story. Dickinson shoots first, hits Jackson in the chest, the bullet or ball, mini ball, lodges in his rib cage 1/2 inch from his heart. You know what Jackson does? He stands there the best he can, presses his hand over the wound to try to get it to stop bleeding, takes careful aim at Charles Dickinson, who's forced to stand there, shoots, drops him dead. True story. So, during the duel, Dickinson did fire first. He hit Jackson, missing Jackson's heart by less than 1/2 inch. The bullet lodged in Jackson's rib cage, and as he pressed his left hand over the wound to control the bleeding, he takes careful aim, fires, and kills Charles Dickinson. What does Jackson do for the next 3 months, Riley, after the duel? He recovers, and he carries that bullet in his chest the remainder of his life. It's never removed. Carries it with him the rest of his life. Well, what's he doing during his recovery? Anybody want to guess, thinking about what recently he had been elected to? What's he doing during his recovery? Anybody want to take a shot at that? What did he get elected to, that he still is? Major General. So he's not a real military guy. So he starts studying strategies, military strategies, to better lead the militia when he recovers. Okay? So during his recovery, he begins to study military strategies to better himself for the position of Major General in the Tennessee Militia. What's the next campaign you're aware of that he takes part in? What's the next thing he's going to do? Battle of New Orleans. However, something happens before that. Kind of interesting. Okay? So in January of 1813, he is ordered to take his militia and go to New Orleans, preparing for the defense of that city. And he marches his men over rough terrain, all 2,000 of them, for nearly 3 months and 500 miles, and all of a sudden he gets a message that they're calling off the defense of New Orleans for now. He will later go back and defend New Orleans. But he is brought there actually, and he gets all the way from Tennessee, halfway through the Mississippi Territory, and he gets a note saying, change your plans, go back. And he was ordered to send his men back without payment. In other words, we'll pay you at this point, but they got to get back on their own now, we're not paying them. And Jackson was free. He could have taken a riverboat back. He could have done anything. You know what he did? He marched with his men back and paid out of his own pocket their expenses, paid their military salary back out of his own pocket. And it was a rough trip, and he had guys that weren't doing very well. He was 46 years old at the time. He was sick himself, but he allowed his horse to be used by who? Who rode his horse? Guy sicker than him, and he walked basically that trek back. And his men loved him for it. His men loved him for his loyalty, to march him back himself and pay out of his own pocket their salaries. And one soldier said he thought that Jackson was tough, and the toughest thing he could think of was the wood hickory. And so his men gave him the nickname Old Hickory, because he was such a tough old bird, and he continued that nickname for the remainder of his life. So during the trek back, his men considered him as tough as the toughest thing they could think of. And one soldier, the toughest thing he could think of was hickory wood. And he gave him the nickname Old Hickory, which stuck with him for the rest of his life. Any questions on that? Okay, we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson, the Indian fighter, next. Before he fights the British at New Orleans, he's fighting Indians. Now, I would preface this by saying, do you know that Native Americans cannot stand Andrew Jackson? Anybody ever been to Riverton Casino? Daniel? Next time you go in there with your brothers and see me in there, we'll walk around and see how many Native American people are carrying $20 bills with them. You know how many you'll find if they know the history of their culture at all? None. They hate them that bad. Native American people will not carry 20s. Why? Because Andrew Jackson's on the 20. And they'll carry 10s and 5s, but they will not carry 20s normally. Okay? And this all comes from the story I'm going to tell you about Andrew Jackson, Indian fighter. Now, we still aren't out here yet. Eventually you're going to have, I'm going to give you a great unit later in the year on Native Americans. And we're going to talk about all the Native Americans here in the westward movement and the Indian campaign of 1876 and the demise of General Custer at the Little Bighorn and all that. But we're talking about Indians that are populating the southeast area of the United States. And they're becoming a problem for the government. Okay? They don't fit in. Right? And so they're trying to get the Indians that live in that area to do what? Convert to white ways, right? And some of them are. Matter of fact, one particular tribe in general, the Creek Indians, most of them have confined to white ways. A lot of women have married white men and they're living the white man ways. But you never get everybody to agree to that, do you? Not everybody wants whites encroaching on their lands and trying to take everything for them. So what happened among the Creek Indians? Anybody want to guess, Regan? Some conformed and some